Hello. So I'm on chapter 11 of Radical Acceptance. There is only one more chapter, so next week, which is fitting, right? Like start the new year off with having finished this and maybe starting our year with a new look at how we look at the world. So I thought that was kind of cool. This week is a great week also for this week, coming out of a holiday, because it is Awakening Together is the name of this chapter. It's chapter 11, Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach. And there's a lot of amazing stuff in this chapter, a lot of stuff actually that I myself work on and I'm working on now. So I'm just going to go through basically her outline of it, and I'll interject and go through all my notes as I can. So first of all, this chapter is really important because we're all social beings, right? So there is that feeling that we need to feel the care of others, right? To feel understood and have others surrounding us with support. We've talked about Sangha in this, which is really how Buddhism looks at healing and enlightening and awakening with this community. So no one does it truly alone. What did she say? She had this great quote: "When mindfulness and compassion are in our relationships with others, we become a vessel for spiritual freedom." It's kind of this idea that we cannot do this alone, that you cannot be completely enlightened and alone. That's just not how human beings work. So she also mentions this really funny misconception of Buddhism, because so much of meditation in Buddhism is thought of as a lone journey. Like we have silent meditations where we're not interacting with others verbally, and we have a lot of pictures of Buddha under the Bodhi tree by himself. And so there's a widely held misconception that Buddhism focuses on the soul being. And the fact is, that's just not true. Like, there's a huge part of Buddhism which is about the interconnectedness to others. So this is a beautiful chapter about that. She talks about how relationships give rise to both the most intense reactivity and the most cherished connectedness. So, and I'm sure all of you can feel that, right? Like, for sure, any of my parent coaches talk about this, right? Like that those relationships that we have, really, we can start to see the triggers are the most intense when we're dealing with other people. And also our most cherished memories usually are with other people, family, friends, just the community in general, because we're social beings. So Tara says we are most awakened in relationships, and relationships are also scary because that is when you feel all of those things that we've talked about that are really hard to deal with, which are fear, of a culmination of all these things. Then she goes on and says, there's a famous Buddhist quote where he is talking to Ananda, and Ananda says, basically, is this the most thing that you get out of life? Isn't part of it about being with others? And the Buddha said, this is the whole of your holy life. It is friendship. It is Oh, now see, when you take notes, make sure your pen works really well because it's not. This is the whole of this holy life: friendship, companionship, and association with the good. Sorry about that. Then I switched to a better pen. So you're welcome. So it is through this kind of communion with others that we experience the real enlightenment of the spiritual journey, is what basically what this chapter is about. That mutual support awakens both the heart and the mind. And she does this little bit of this chapter, going back and making sure that we're aware that the first and biggest principle in Buddhism is doing no harm. And that in Buddhist teaching, there's a lot of focus on what to do to make sure that doesn't happen and what to do when it does happen. So there's a big kind of focus on reconciling anyone you've harmed with anyone you've harmed, and also focusing on right speech, that you're taking things and saying things as they should be. And then she goes, oh, this is kind of cool. So this I appreciate on many, many levels, because as a parenting coach, this is something that I think is very true. And we talk about what should you actually be teaching, right? And in Buddhism, what they teach is, if our biggest principle is to do no harm, what happens when we do? Inevitably, we will harm someone else. So what happens? What do we do? What's the plan? How do we come out of that? And so she has and outlines these 3 steps. She says the first thing that you do is take responsibility for your action in harming someone else. So you need to take full responsibility. And then 2, you need to listen deeply to the suffering that you've caused. And that's a really interesting one, because I think sometimes that's easier said than done. And you can see with children, that's something that they don't do readily. So that's a really hard thing, to actually sit and listen to what you actually have done. So you take responsibility. I did do this thing. I recognize that I did this thing. And then you sit and listen to the other person express that harm. And then 3 is that sincere apology and resolving to act with compassion in the future. So there's a little bit of this, a sincere apology. So not forcing someone to give an apology. Talk about that a lot with kids, right? Where if you force your kid through punishment, if they don't give an apology, it's not a sincere apology. And most other kids are very in tune with that, because it doesn't feel sincere. It doesn't feel like they listened to what was done or are taking responsibility. It feels like they're just doing, it's just words. It's not even right words. So I thought that was very cool that she focused on that. And it was a really cool kind of interim and look at the most important thing in our society, really, right? She also then goes on and says that often our behaviors are because we're reacting out of the patterns, which we've talked about a lot in this book, right? That those old stories, those old patterns, that trance that she talks about in the very beginning of this book. And instantly listening or speaking, right? So we're kind of on autopilot, if you will. So, if something happens, we might react, right? And then instantly talk about whatever it is, because we're just reacting on the thing. I am very guilty of this, because for most of my life, I find silence awkward and uncomfortable. I don't know what that's from, whether it's because I have to listen to my own mind, or I'm not sure where it originally stemmed from, but it became a very big pattern that I just try to fill space. So this part of this chapter is very, very cool because it's something that I work on all the time, especially in the last couple of years. So she said, we can work on this through what's called insight dialogue with another person. This is so beautiful and really difficult. I think this is something that you could definitely tie into nonviolent communication, which you all know is my other favorite book. I had not read this book previously, but nonviolent communication I've read several times and highly recommend. So she says, when you do insight dialogue, it's like a meditation for listening and speaking. Okay. And most people think of meditation as something that you do by yourself, but you can do meditations, all types of things. You can do meditations in the car when you're driving. You can do meditations while you're walking, right? Like all of these things. So there's this kind of misconception again that meditation is done on yourself only. And it's kind of beautiful that she's now showing us this connection to others. So if you want to engage in insightful dialogue, here are her kind of instructions to do so. First, do not immediately respond. And this is so funny because I talked with my own coach last week, and I will share with you that we talked a little bit about something, and I said, you know, my gut reaction when somebody asks me something is to immediately respond. And she said, oh, that sounds pretty impulsive. And I never thought of myself as impulsive, but when it comes to that, I absolutely am. And I have said to several friends how jealous I am that they pause and really think about words before they say them, because I literally just say them. And the first step in this is don't respond immediately. So I love this, love. And if you're an extrovert like me and have had, 40 years of doing this, it's not easy. But if you don't respond immediately, you also can move into this number 2, which is to intentionally pause. Now, I have had several coaching clients where we've talked about giving themselves space to either process things or really be mindful and aware of what is coming up for them. And this is literally, she writes that in this chapter, she says number 2 is pause. Mindfully notice what you are experiencing, which is what I have told clients. And then you might ask yourself, what really wants attention? Ask yourself that internally during this pause. And then notice the feelings and thoughts that are bubbling up. Okay? And I think an intentional pause is so beautiful because it is a lot of self-compassion. It's giving yourself space. And it's also bringing in that intentional mindfulness. It also allows you to be kind and compassionate and a wonderful listener to the person that you're talking with. Because during that intentional pause, you can also be aware and mindful if you have judgments that are coming up, if you're interpreting or you have inner comments just popping up as this person is talking to you. And that pause allows you to kind of process all of that stuff instead of acting impulsively and or reacting in patterns that you have done your whole life. So it also gives you a chance when you have an intentional pause. And this is something that's built up in some of her previous activities that she's asked you to do. What are you experiencing in your body, right, during this pause? So you've taken in what someone else has said. Instead of responding immediately, you're taking an intentional pause. You've done this intentional pause when it came to yourself. So you're reminding yourself how to be embodied, right? And when you do this, you really are allowing yourself to let go of expectations, any agenda you had. You're going to listen to the other person. And if you have done this, right, this intentional pause, it allows you to speak mindfully because you're in tune with everything that went on. You've processed everything that went on and you were mindful and aware of everything that went on. She also talks about this way of doing this dialogue with someone else. I think, what did I say? Intentional dialogue? Insight dialogue. Also is the path to letting go of the trance of separation. And we talked about that in the very beginning chapters. I can't remember now. I want to say it was like chapter 2 or 3. It might have even been in 1 as well, where part of this trance that she talks about, right? Part of what happens to people is that we separate ourselves from others, right? It's a coping mechanism. And when we engage in this type of communication, it really allows us to let go of that and really be connected to them. Also, it leads to vulnerability. So she does another, Tara likes in this book to give a lot of real world examples. She does another example here of, and what she calls the blessing of vulnerability. And what she says is, my suggestion is to admit your feelings to others. This might feel gigantic, especially if it's more than one person you're admitting a feeling to. But when we do that, we allow others to also have permission to share with us. Now, there is a caveat to this. The fact is, when you are vulnerable with another person, it does open yourself up to this chance to be hurt. However, it also has one of the greatest rewards, right? Because this is the acceptance that allows you to move most freely into enlightenment. And she brings in some interesting things here. She talks about interventions that are done and how that's a great example of vulnerability, where you're, and the chances is big because the person could accept it or they could reject it, in which case you have laid your most vulnerable self on the line, right? It's also really interesting. I'm going to share kind of anonymously. One of the most beautiful things about being vulnerable is your greatest achievements towards enlightenment or your personal growth journey will occur if you are able to be vulnerable. So one of the biggest compliments I've gotten, and I actually got this within the past 2 weeks from a client, was they shared with me that they appreciated that they could be completely honest with me, right? They could share things that they might not share with everybody, which is vulnerability. And they didn't feel judged. They felt it was a supportive place to share those things. And they didn't feel judged or scared to do so. I can't think of any more beautiful thing to say, right? I'm almost crying thinking about it because it's this, what Tara's talking about in this chapter. It is truly a blessing to be vulnerable, and it opens yourself up because you've taken off those chains of all those trances, of all those stories you've told yourself, of all of those triggers you're dealing with, and letting go of those fears in a big way by saying exactly how you feel. And when you're in a relationship with a person, right, like this friendship, whether it's a friend, a family member, a therapist, anything like that, and they connect with you and support you through that, it is where you're going to see the biggest growth, the biggest leaps, because that's the only point you can get to the deep down stuff. And you will see the greatest rewards from that. And I'm not saying it's not scary. So that client, in particular, has been with me for a long time. And so you build up that trust. And also, the amount of personal growth they have done is amazing. It's so beautiful to see. So I think that was a perfect example, real life example that I have to go back and forth. All right. Then she goes on and talks about friends. Friends refresh the source of our being. We relax. We stop regarding painful emotions or confused behaviors as spiritual backsliding. I'm going to just circle back on that for a minute. What this means, that community, remember we talked about that community, and that Buddhism focuses on you have to have this community. And the reason that is because if we stop regarding our emotions or behaviors as like a terrible thing for us. Oh my gosh, right? Like, I was so this, and it's because I'm so this that I can't move on, and I'm a bad person, and all of those things. It's kind of liberating to see that, oh no, everybody has those. So you wake up, right? That inner peace and understanding together by sharing intentions. You know, that speaking and listening honestly, being present, communicating from the heart, right? Means that when you do that well, right? And a little bit of vulnerability in there, right? You realize that you're not the oddball or out of place, but that we all experience those. And it may not be the exact same. So no one has to experience your exact same, but recognizing that it is a shared experience makes it feel doable, because now you mindfully have acceptance and love and support because you're giving it to others, and by giving it to the other people, you realize you also deserve it yourself, and you allow that to come in. So this increases self-trust, your self-confidence. You have balance from relationships because you're accepting others, and this can have a huge ripple effect, which is just gorgeous and beautiful. Suffering is a shared concern. It's a part of everyone's life. Pain does not belong to an individual. So it's not just you who is in pain. And sometimes when we get in that very lonely place, it can be a dangerous place. You know, we isolate ourselves and then feel like we're the only one who gets it or experiences this. It makes us feel alone and untouchable by others. But if we can reach out within relationships and not take pain personally, it basically is the gateway to radical acceptance. And she says this is essential. You cannot take pain personally and be practicing radical acceptance. It's part of the acceptance of this is how it is, and this is how it is for everyone. Everyone has that pain. She said, there is a quote from, again, Buddhism, and I didn't write down who, sorry, that says life's difficulties are caused by myriad circumstances. It is not because of you. It is not because of your specific circumstances. There are many, many things that suck in life, I guess is what I would say, but that cause pain, that cause suffering in your life. It is not a result of just you. Okay. This is not a personal problem. You're not alone. It's a shared pain. And together you can erase that once you feel that you're together on this path with someone else, whether it's multiple people like in a support group or friends or just one other partner, it kind of erases that unworthiness trance that she talked about before. And there's this, quote, shared suffering, which is really, again, where we can look at friendship. And this was beautiful. She said, friendship is when we can behold with clarity and love and nourish the seeds of liberation. Oh, that's so beautiful, really. All right. That's it. That's it. Just, be vulnerable, which is not easy. Pause a lot. Work on your listening skills. And be insightful. So the challenges this week are really guided reflections and not so meditations. So I will just state them here. So first is setting your intention. So this is my dog setting her intention to be calm. Set your intention to be present, honest, and kind. And remind yourself each day. Okay? Remind yourself each day. My intention is to be present, honest, and kind. It's kind of like a cool mantra. I think I talked about this in the beginning of this book. When you have little mantras like that, sometimes I find them really nice to have on sticky notes and plug to different places. So if you drive to work, put it on the steering wheel of your car. If you always get coffee on your coffee pot or the mirror when you brush your teeth in the morning, it's just a great way that you don't forget to do it every day. Do it, you link it to something else. And I like the mirror or the steering wheel kind of thing, or sometimes the coffee too. What I like about those things is you're kind of in a ritual way and you can take a pause to do those. Like you can look in the mirror and say, my intention is to be present, honest, and kind. Or in the car, before I start the car, if it's on my steering wheel, I can do the same thing. So I kind of like that ability. She also talks about creating a body anchor. I love this. Love this. It is something I talk about in my parenting coaching, although I have not had succinct language like this. She says a body anchor is picking 2 to 3 touch points in your body that kind of anchor you back to your intention. Okay. This could be breathing, like just paying attention to the breath or where you feel it, like in your chest. It could be a touch point might be the sensation of your shoulders, the weight of your shoulders, whether you're hunching over or doing them back. It could be in your hands, in your stomach, or even in your feet. And she says, practice the presence of these touch points, right? Becoming more aware of these touch points throughout the day. And again, so what does this do? This is the embodied presence. So it allows us to, again, reconnect and become embodied within ourselves. So if our intention is to stay present, sometimes our mind might be racing or we start reacting, right? And if we can have those body anchors, it allows us to come back into that embodied presence. Love it. And super simple. And I would teach kids this. Have them pick 2, because when they start flipping their lid, I've talked about that, or they start to feel like they're getting out of the green zone, if you do zones of regulation, or for you, if they're feeling dysregulated, having them have a body anchor brings embodied presence, which is like the beginning. Especially with that could be the precursor to breathing. So if you have kids that are having a hard time doing, like with kids, I do the 2-4-3 breathing. Breathe in for 2. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm doing it wrong. 3-3-2-4. Breathe in for 3, hold for 2, breathe out for 4. that will flip their sympathetic nervous system back to parasympathetic nervous system, which is that amygdala hijack, which is the explosive kind of stuff. But sometimes it's hard for kids to do that because they're not embodied. They don't have that presence or that mindfulness. And this is like teaching a little bit of mindfulness. So I super love this. So do that. Set your intention every day. Remind yourself each day. And do the body anchor. That's your first challenge. The second challenge is to speak from the heart. To listen from the heart. So, listening from the heart, and again, remembering the things that I've already talked about today, is letting go of your own thoughts and agenda. And I don't know how many times I repeat that to all people. If you really want to be present with someone, if you really want to be a good listener, you let go of your agenda. You know, what did I say? Acceptance instead of expectations. You want to accept and not expect. When you have expectations, you are not fully listening, right? Because you have an agenda. And you have to let go of that. Whether it's with a partner, whether it's with a coworker, a peer, a friend, a child, a mother, you have to let go of that. And then becoming aware of your sensations in the body. And she says, especially the heart. So really being in your body, you've let go of all of those things. You're not racing in your own thoughts. You're not having expectations, but you're really paying attention as this person speaks to the sensations in your body and really your heart, like what's your heart telling you. She says you have to be really careful when you're listening and with an open heart to your thoughts and your mind wandering, especially be aware if they're going towards judgments, right? And you have to kind of say, oh, we're getting into that judgment area. I'm going to let that go and come back to that open-hearted listening. And we're not agreeing with whatever this person is saying. And I say this to parents a lot. If you are letting go of that agenda and not judging does not mean you agree with what the person is saying. It just means that you're fully listening to what they're saying and not shutting it out. So I think there is a misconception that if you don't oppose it right then and there, that you're agreeing with it, but that is not the case. And there is a time and a place for speaking, not during listening. All right. Also, being present and being aware of the other person's changes in pitch, tone, moods, and what words they use all becomes like even more information. So it's almost like when you can do full embodied listening, you hear more than just the words, right? You feel more than just the words. So there's some real beauty in that. So that's the second challenge. First is setting your own intention, having body anchors, right? So that you're learning yourself how to be embodied, present. 2 is really try listening from the heart to people and giving that release of expectations, agenda, and judgments. Paying attention to your own sensations and their specific things that they're saying as they're talking to you. And the last thing is to speak from the heart. So do not prepare words in advance. I think this is hysterical because I actually don't do this for anything. So I do a lot of presentations, at least in my career I did. Obviously I do a lot of Facebook Lives. I do not practice words. I do not write words down. Sometimes I stumble and fall, but in general, I think what this does is allow you to really speak from the heart and be authentic. And I think in general, you can tell when something is rehearsed. So not having prepared words can really help. Now, there are some times that I encourage people to have prepared words. Usually those are behavior plans when you're dealing with people who have really hard ways of dealing with them. Sometimes I do have prepared words because I'm trying to stop the overreaction, right? But in general, if you're going to speak open-heartedly to someone, we don't want to have prepared words. Speak slowly and, shockingly, pause. She says you should really look at pausing before, after, and during, right? Before you speak, you should have a mindful pause. After you speak, you should have a mindful pause. And several times during, you should have a mindful pause. And she says during, this gives space for what they said to settle. So if you are speaking after you've done open-hearted listening, having that space allows everything to kind of settle and them to be then done with theirs, have some processing time, and then be open to whatever you say. It also allows you time to check in with your own heart and mind before responding. And this is, again, I told you something I'm working on, because what I find often is that I don't check in with myself. I do an automatic response based on the words I hear from the other person. And I do an immediate response. However, if I really want to fully speak from my own heart, I have to pause to really reflect on what I want to say, which is not easy sometimes. Some people are really good at this. I think some people have a natural tendency to do this and some don't. So if you do have this natural tendency, that's wonderful. And if you don't, you can learn it. And this also allows that mindfulness to be present for what you really truly feel, what you truly need, and what you truly want to convey to the other person, right? So it's interesting that pausing, I mean, the other part of radical acceptance, I feel, is pausing. She's talked about pausing now several times. That sacred pause is becoming more and more important, which is so interesting. Okay. She says, radical acceptance is forgiving perfectly imperfect self. So we realize that nobody, ourselves or others, are going to be perfect, and we can forgive the imperfections. It allows the genuine intimacy to occur between you and the other person. It trains ourselves to be present, which I feel like we all can work on, whether you've been meditating for 15 years and practicing mindfulness or you just started yesterday. We all can really learn to be present and what it means to be present, and an embodied presence at that. Also, it really brings loving kindness and mindfulness, which is the heart of these Buddhist teachings, right? That honesty and kindness is how we should live our lives. How do we do that? We do that through loving kindness of ourselves and others, and mindfulness to that. And finally, it dissolves that separation, allowing us to be truly authentic and have that true connectedness to others, which is like this beautiful time of year we talk about, right? Being connected to others and truly being our authentic selves and all of that loveliness. So that was chapter 11 of Radical Acceptance. I fully plan on being here next week and doing the last chapter of Radical Acceptance. If you haven't read, you can read along, or you can just go through these little live presentations, which are like mini reviews or book reviews, I don't know what you want to call them, of Radical Acceptance. Again, I'm going to throw this on my business Facebook page. It'll be on my personal page, but if you haven't seen the others, it's easier to go to my business page to see them, because I've tried not to do a lot of posts in between so that you can find them readily. And that's Best Self, Best Health on Facebook. So until then, I shall see you next week. Have a lovely week and a beautiful new year. And I will see you in 2022.